The Vinyl Destination.
Hello guys, my name is Dion Rush.
I'm Mike Kenner.
My name is Johnny Brister.
Welcome to The Vinyl Destination. This is a brand new podcast where three friends get together, choose an album and discuss. This week we have the 1977 album from Steely Dan, Asia. How you guys doing? You guys had a good week?
Yeah, it's been mad, man. My son turned 1. So,
Oh yeah? How did he like his car?
He loved his car.
Oh good.
Yeah, he's well into it. So that was really cool. He's been going out in it like every day. Not for long, you know, but just going out for a little push around thing. So yeah, plays like really cheesy music as he goes around, which is quite funny.
You mean from the car?
Yeah,
Oh,
so the car's got.
Oh
man, it's a pretty insane car. It's got it's a Range Rover. And it's like battery powered, so when he's a little bit older there's a pedal that he can use, and it's got gears like forward and back, 2 different speed settings. It's got a little MP3 player in it as well.
Insane. That's so good.
Oh man, it's mad.
But you can good, don't they?
You can bypass it and push him along, which is nice, but then also he just sits in it at the moment while we push him, and he just presses all the buttons and makes music and stuff. It's
properly
really fun.
cute, man.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been a good week.
You notice that it's stuff's like flying by. Like I can't believe it's almost like 6 weeks on Monday since we got back from Finland, I think.
Is it really?
That's quite depressing.
How many weeks have we been in lockdown then? 4?
I think something like 4, yeah.
Well, it was exactly the week after, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They locked us down.
Yeah, so does that not mean it's the 6th week? So you saying 6 weeks on Monday we got back?
We got back on this, I think it was the 16th or something, and that on Monday.
Yeah, it was the 16th.
Ago. Insane.
So we'll be going in, we would have done 5 weeks lockdown.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we'll be going into our 6th week next week. Wow.
Yeah.
It has flown by. It really has, actually.
Length of a summer holiday, that is, at school. Remember that always felt like the longest time in the world. It felt like an eternity, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Until you got to the end of August, and then school was like around the corner, like, fuck, that's gone too fast.
I know. September's looming.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I just actually had not that it's an odd thing right now, but I had another cancellation for July for a wedding. And you're like, they're just slowly dropping off, continuing to drop off, you know, and you do wonder when we get back to it, you know.
I think it's going to be longer for us than most things. You know, we'll be the last people back. It'll, you know, as they gradually start to include normal life again into what's going on. I think gatherings and gigs and stuff are going to be the last thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think that they're not going to come back to normal as we know it until there's a vaccine, which is like a year, isn't it? I mean, they just wouldn't do it, would they? They wouldn't be like, oh, we're going to reopen all this. People could get ill, but it's fine. No, they're going to need to have a vaccine to be like, okay, let's have festivals again and all this stuff.
But you know what confuses me about that is the vaccine is only useful if you have it prior to catching it, right? It stops you catching it.
Well, a vaccine is essentially like a weaker version of whatever the illness is, right? So that you develop the antibodies and to fight it off, which means that if you were to get it, or if you come into contact with it in the future, you probably won't get ill.
Cool. I feel like I'm on a video consultancy with my GP. It's great.
Imagine that you rang up your GP and they put you through to me and Mike.
Yeah, you might as well start writing your will.
yeah, exactly.
Tell you what, I do want to know, right? What's Phil Mitchell up to in this epidemic? What's he doing?
Up to, Phil?
Fuck off.
I reckon he's probably practicing his Captain Hook for this year at Panto. That's the next time he's going to be working.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably his next gig.
How have we mentioned Phil Mitchell in every podcast so far? Literally every week he gets a mention. One day he's going to listen to this and be like, "Man, I've got to write an album with these three."
Phil Mitchell.
Yeah.
He's going to be like, right, I need to do a tour. I need to do a tour. I know I'm going to call. I know exactly who I'm going to call.
All right, man, it's Phil. Got a gig tonight. Playing down at Queen Bee.
I'm doing my Steely Dan covers gig.
Steely Phil.
Steely Phil. Again, another thing. I would pay money. I would pay good money.
I would.
Steely Phil.
I paid good money to see him doing Taylor Swift and things like that.
Do you know what else I'd love to see? Right, I'd pay good money to see like a Phil Mitchell cooking show. Like, I know, just like what would he make? That's what I don't know. It'd be so like to the point, so brutal. You got to get your eggs. You got to crack them, put them in a bowl, whisk them straight in the pan, egg on toast. Job done. Like,
and then they ask him to zest the lemon.
No chance. You'll get no lemon zesting from Phil.
Give him a grater and they're like, he's like, I don't need that. Watch this. Just gives it some of his stubble.
Oh God.
We need to get back on track and talk about the album because we're talking about Phil again.
Let's talk about Phil. Cooking with Phil. This is something we need to make happen. Let's start a petition.
Well, as long as we get to do like the theme music or be involved in some way, I'd be happy. Yeah. Anything Phil Mitchell.
Yeah,
Johnny could be a stunt double.
And then, I think you're Phil and I'm more Grant, but we don't need to go there.
Don't know. Wouldn't go that far.
Mate, put a leather jacket on, we'll see. That's the true test.
Did you guys see that Grant Mitchell, what's his real name? Ross Kemp. In the NHS
at the front line.
Front line, yeah. I was expecting him to go in with like a bulletproof vest and be like, I'm Ross, I'm unarmed. You've got these like nurses just like looking at him like.
No, I haven't seen it.
You can always depend on Ross Kemp to be at the front line, regardless of what's going on in the world.
Whatever line it is, he's there, mate.
He's there. He's right at the front. Right at the front.
You just know at school when they were picking people for PE, he's at the front line and he's like, pick me.
Pick me.
I want them to do like Ross Kemp in Sainsbury's or something, like, you know,
in
front of the line. Yeah, front line.
Three items at a time, please, guys. 3 items. That's your maximum.
What a lad. So the album. Okay. Where are we starting? Mike, you've obviously been a big fan of this album for a long time, and obviously you picked it as well. I'd be interested for you to do a little opening on what got you into it and
what got me into Asia.
Yeah, a little brief overview.
Oh man, I don't know. I mean, I started getting into Steely Dan like at uni when obviously, when your music tastes really diversify. I think, well, for me it did anyway, was when I just started studying everything. And Asia was always one of those albums that was talked about as, it's got a session A-list on it. I know that Steely Dan, they'd been around for a good few years. I think this is their 5th album, is it? Or 6th?
Sick by Red Summer, but I don't know.
Yeah, I believe it's 6th. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Asia's the sort of the main album where they really do work as just a duo. I know before that they were a band, but at the time, like their first record had like Reeling in the Ears and stuff like that.
Well, that's actually probably I was going to say something later, but that's probably my favourite Steely Dan album, and that's probably more the Steely I go to.
For the first record?
Yeah, and just kind of. So it was really nice for you to say Asia and get into a bit more, because I definitely steered towards earlier Dan. It was, I was just intrigued to know what kind of got you into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Asia's just one of those records. I think it really toes that fine line between pop music and like jazz. and the jazz rock fusion that was kind of going on at that time. And they really kind of really stayed in between. It's not too much of either. It's like that perfect fusion between having a pop record and having that complex harmony that Steely Dan are like kind of known for, I guess, is that fusion of that really complex like harmonic ideas going on, but also making it, you know, a commercial success of a record, which is not an easy feat, to sort of toe that line so finely down the middle.
Yeah, I think it's what I would say. It's like it's sophisticated without being inaccessible, isn't it? It's kind of not too far one way. You know, it's a nice pop. It is a pop record, really, isn't it? When you listen to it, you know, it's the harmony. I guess
definitely
not the
what
harmony,
I took from it. Now you say that is that the drums are much more the pop rock side of things, and then I hear almost the sax and the piano and the guitars and the harmony they use makes it that jazz thing. And I first heard this album when I was probably 15 or 16, and I didn't get it. I must have read in a drum magazine, you've got to get this album. You know, it's one of those albums that everyone, especially for drummers. And my mum got it for me, and I remember just hearing it and just not getting it. And obviously, you know, it's a young age compared to, you know, being now and understanding music differently. But I understand now when you sort of say about the fusion thing. I think back then it was a bit too quirky for my age group and what I listened to anyway. So it was interesting revisiting it because I didn't have the same experience when I was younger.
Yeah,
completely.
Yeah. You know? Well, it's definitely not your conventional sort of middle of the road pop record, and I guess in that it's not an easy listening record either. I know that some of these harmonic things, like especially fusion or fusion ideas, jazz fusion, it's an acquired taste, man. Like I still don't really listen to a lot of fusion. I have like a half an hour kind of max. After about half an hour, I need to listen to something that's got a bit more of a simplicity to it. After about half an hour, I need to listen to a song.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Other than a piece of music. Now, there are obviously there are exceptions to that rule. There are various records that I can listen to all day long, and they're great. But that's definitely through studying music and kind of acquiring that taste for the complexity of color that jazz brings, you know, with the extensions and with the sort of more complex harmonic ideas. It's something that you kind of grow to appreciate, you know, but I wouldn't say that, you know, you'll ever get a banger out of a jazz fusion record. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely something that takes. Similarly, Johnny, it's the same with me. Like in the sort of teenage years, I wasn't massively into this more, you know, sophisticated harmony type of things. And Mike, same. You know, going to music college, that's when you start to really diversify. And then I don't know if I don't know really what it is that creates that change. Is it just like what goes on to make you say, is it just getting a bit more mature musically maybe, and or something to make you go, I really like this now?
Can I add to that question to you two?
Yeah.
And it's like, one of my questions was going to be, do you get into this harmony because as a musician you learn a lot from it and it's a big understanding? Are you getting into that, or are you getting into it because of maturity? That's what I wanted to ask you.
I think it's an element of both. I think the problem with when you've grown up, and as you grow up and as you develop your musical tastes, you know, the majority of things we listen to are quite musically simplistic or musically simple, and therefore when you hear these things that are a bit more exotic or a bit more colourful, shall we say, your ear isn't too in tune with it. You know, we all love a 1-4-5 or, you know, a 1-5-6-4, or, you know, all these progressions that we're just so at home with. You know, that these new things, these new ideas, you kind of need to get your ear around. You know, because but only because they're foreign to you. It's the same way as you grow up in a different country or a different area. That becomes your musical norm. you know, and it's the same if you were to grow up listening to jazz, then you love jazz, you know, and that's what you're more musically accustomed to. And I think what happens during uni, or you know, when for me anyway, when I was studying, I then become more acquainted with this sound, you know, and with these different contexts and you know what's going on musically.
Yeah, agreed. I would just to add to that as well. I do remember thinking, right, I really need to get my head around some of this stuff because I can learn a lot from it. That was definitely a big thought process. I remember thinking I can get a lot from this, but
Absolutely.
also I do remember thinking this is just really cool. Like it does sound really cool, and I it's the curiosity of being like, cool, what's he done there? What's going on there with this or that really drew me in initially with this stuff. But yeah, I'm with you, Mike, that I love listening to quote fusion, but it depends, you know, it depends on my mood and stuff. And it's not my first go-to choice of music, you know?
Yeah, I think it's the lack of like, that simplicity that we're so used to. After a while, it gets a bit exhausting. Like you end up sort of gagging for like a perfect cadence or something. Do you know what I mean? Like
but what's interesting about this album is that I feel like the simplicity comes from the drums. Like, of course, you've got Asia and we're getting into it properly, but Steve Gadd, it's an absolute masterclass. And of course, you've got Home at Last, and it's an iconic halftime shuffle by Purdy. But the actual, like I said, apart from Asia, probably a lot of the songs are very simplistic in terms of parts for drums, and that's what I found interesting. Is that I really enjoyed listening to the drums and what they did musically, and then all that quirkiness and that color comes from the other instruments, and that's almost the fusion for me. Is that you, and obviously you guys can go into more depth with chords and things like that, but definitely the merging of the two was really interesting for me actually, and how and hearing that, like, because there's some fusion that I'm the same as you guys, like, I can listen to and appreciate, but I wouldn't often sit down just to listen to fusion or chill out to, and the drums often all go as well, and that's when it all becomes a bit of this huge thing coming at you once, and almost your ears are like, what do I take in? And it's obviously phenomenal, but this was a different experience where it was like, oh, the drums are like playing pop grooves, rock grooves, and then you've got fusion on top of it. That was something I definitely took.
Yeah, I mean, well, the fusion is a term for the fusing of music styles and music genres. That's what it is. So I mean,
but I mean, the drums definitely weren't as mental as a lot of fusion.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, you obviously the drums' job is to keep time. You can listen to things like Billy Cobham's Spectrum and things like that, where it is, you know, it's keeping time. It's fairly solid. You know, songs like Stratus and things where it's not mental drums. Do you know what I mean? I would say fusion definitely can have an element of simplicity to it as well. You know.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, yeah, when we talk fusion, really is you're exactly right in saying it can be a fusion of multiple styles, but really what people are talking about when they say it and what we're talking about is like jazz fusion.
Jazz.
It's basically just like rock, pop and jazz together, isn't it? If you want to put it in like in a nutshell. And I think this album ticks all those boxes, doesn't it, of those three styles? I mean, I think it was pretty pivotal with the whole yacht rock thing as well that we spoke about last week.
Yeah, it was, absolutely. Yeah.
Which is interesting because yacht rock is not, I wouldn't think yacht rock as being fusion at all. You know, it's quite
that's like smooth,
like, exactly. Smooth, yeah. So yeah, it's quite a multifaceted record, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, like I said, it was interesting, especially because I'm into Can't Buy a Thrill, which was their '72 album, and knowing that they started as a band. And I don't really know a lot about their history, but I believe they started as a band. It's really interesting when you get not that many years later, 5 years later, and it's the two of them, and obviously they're known as being absolute musical geniuses. It's interesting to see that journey, and I haven't listened to all the albums in between. Like I said, Can't Buy a Thrill is kind of my go-to Dan record. it'd be really interesting to probably hear them in order and kind of hear that maybe that
progression.
Change. Yeah, I reckon that'd be an interesting thing to do.
It's funny you say they started as a band, sort of. I mean, they were originally actually just a song. They were staff songwriters, weren't they, for ABC?
Yeah.
So the producer, I have his name here, Gary Katz. So he was their friend from early days, and he became a staff producer at ABC, and he actually got them the job in there as staff songwriters. Yeah. And it's Gary Katz. He actually produced like all their records, I think. He definitely did most of them.
Oh, really?
If not all of them, yeah. Their mate Gary Katz. It was when, as staff songwriters, it was decided their music was too complex for the ABC artists. So they recommended that they started a band. And Steely Dan, the name actually came. It's named after a dildo.
Is it really?
Yeah, from Naked Lunch, William S. Burroughs novel. So obviously they were a band with a few musicians. And they went through a few, as you could imagine, from players such as Jeff Porcaro, David Paich, I have here. Is that right?
Yep.
David Deutsch. Paich, yeah. That's right. So they were in there at some point, but they left and formed Toto.
He did, Carl, I think, did Katie Light. And I think he did the whole thing. And it's interesting you talk about these players. Like, these players will keep cropping up on other albums.
Oh, absolutely. Jeff, so those members of Toto left at some point as they noticed that it was sort of becoming a revolving door and more session musicians were being used. And the constant strive for perfection that was going on in the studios as well. Like sometimes those musicians were asked to do about 40 odd takes on each track, you know. You also had Jeff Baxter and Michael McDonald, who
definitely got to talk about Michael McDonald's BBs at some point.
100%. Yeah. But yeah, he's so they left as well, and they joined the Doobie Brothers, obviously.
So were these guys that you're mentioning, they were in Steely Dan, or they were just guys that they were
in the band? Yeah, they were added to the band and then left the band, or you know, there was a lot of musicians that went in and out of the band, and obviously session musicians were getting called in to play as well.
I saw a live clip actually of I'm pretty sure it looked like Dennis Chambers on drums actually, and it's almost like with Steely Dan, if you got to play or live or record with Steely Dan, it almost feels like back then that was a bit of this guy's serious, he's a great player. And I think I definitely heard a podcast or read an article about the Porcaro thing, because I think he was about 21 when he did Katie Lied. And it's interesting that it seems like if you're involved with Steely Dan, I imagine that people just went, "Oh, he's serious," and of course they are all serious players. But that's definitely a thing. I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's some serious names, especially on this album. You know.
Serious names, big time, man.
Well, interestingly, there was, and you can delve into this one, Mike, but there apart from obviously one track, it was all the same bass player.
Well, Walter Becker was a bass player as well as a guitarist, and he used to play bass on a lot of stuff. And then Chuck Rainey came along, and I've got a quote here which I found great, which was, "Once I met Chuck Rainey, I felt there was no need to bring my bass to the studio anymore." Which is a pretty decent compliment to get from a musician of that sort of stature. But Chuck Rainey was their guy, was their go-to guy. From the looks of it, that's not to say they didn't try a bunch of different musicians for each track. Now these guys would literally change their whole band. You know, what's funny, so Roger Nichols was their engineer for a lot of this stuff in the studio, for a lot of their records, if not all of it again. And he said that it was amazing, like Donald Fagen and Walter Becker would go into the studio knowing exactly what they wanted it to sound like already. and they would literally have a whole band in there, and they would know whether or not it was going to work straight away. They'd be like, no, this isn't going to work. And the next day they'd have a whole new band of different A-list session players in, and they would mix and match, and they knew exactly what they were after, and they could constantly just change the musicians until they got what they wanted, which is insane when you think about what's going on these records, and they were going in there knowing exactly what it was going to sound like before, you know.
I think what's also really impressive about it is the consistency of the production on the album. It doesn't sound mismatched, or
that's very like true.
A record.
I'd noticed that, especially with a lot of the drummers, especially like your Gads and your Purdy's, they have a sound, and even Jim Keltner and the other two I hadn't heard of actually, that we'll get to, and obviously have a great list of recordings that they've done before. But I agree, although they all have their own sound, it didn't sound like just this album chucked together by Let's Choose Great Players. The production across the board, it really fitted as an album.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't sound disjointed. It doesn't sound like there's been a massive personnel change every day. And that's quite an amazing achievement, I would say.
Yes,
that in itself is really impressive. I mean, obviously the fact that they managed to get all these people in is also incredibly impressive. But
the budget they must have spent on session players, and I heard, I think it was on their classic albums thing. Which for any listeners out there, definitely, if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It's really cool to see it.
It's really good. Really good.
They talk about how it took a little over a year to record the album.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, and there's lots of great things, and some of the musicians who are on it talk about it, and like Mike was saying, they just changed the whole band, and one of the things, which song was it on? Maybe it was on Peg. With trying all these different guitarists to do the solo, and they play some of the clips that were recorded prior to it, and even I think they played a couple before the actual one, and you still go, yeah, the one they had, it was the best one. It sounded, but then is that because that's how I've heard it? But actually, my opinion would be it was definitely the best one out of the few I heard.
Yeah, well, imagine the amount of comping that they had to do going through all those takes afwards. The post-production was probably insane, wasn't it? Like,
would it be recorded on tape? Would they have to cut in? Does anyone know if it was done on tape or what it was like back then?
I would have thought so in '77.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, '76, I guess it would have been recorded. It was released early '77.
But that's hard to.
September, I think, wasn't it? 77.
That's right. No, it wasn't. It was really, But can we just take a minute to dive into 77? Because I know we spoke about it briefly last week, or 76, but I'm just going to mention some names and some album names here. These all came out in 1977. Okay, so here we go. Hard Again by Muddy Waters, which is his first one since leaving Chess Records. So the name's Bootsy Baby, which is essentially Bootsy Collins' best record. You've got Rumours, you've got Peter Gabriel's first record, you've got Go For Your Guns from the Isley Brothers, which was probably their best record, Exodus by Bob Marley, you've got the first record from Elvis Costello, My Aim Is True. You've got Iggy Pop, released 2 albums in 1977. Both of them were collaborative efforts with David Bowie. You've got Out of the Blue, ELO. You've got Heroes by Bowie himself. You've got Bat Out of Hell, Meatloaf. You've got News of the World by Queen. These are all 1977. Here You Come Again, Dolly Parton. You got
I'm definitely voting that the 70s was the best era.
I mean, this is one year.
I know.
You've got All in All by Earth, Wind and Fire. You've got Chic's first record. You've got Slow Hand by Clapton.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
And Johnny, we have Rockin' All Over the World came out this year as well.
Do you know, again, that's my mum has been listening to these podcasts. She's going to absolutely love that. Yeah, I mean...
Not only that, I'll just butt in a quick mention for the punk explosion, which happened in 1977, which featured albums from The Damned, The Clash, The Buzzcocks, the Stranglers, the Sex Pistols, the Jam, literally like every UK punk band that of note, came out this year.
It's really funny. No, none of our listeners can tell, but
there's a
Mike's
little fly in here.
And it's been going on for a little while, and every now and again it goes, and it goes.
Can you hear him?
Yeah,
I've got to get rid. I
can hear it a couple of times. It goes.
He's massive. He's a big boy. Let me get rid of him quickly.
It's amazing. And you think we talked about Hotel California last week, and that was the year before. I think Mike's right. Like that 77 is a very strong year, and it just, and I know we touched upon this last week, and we talk about it's just a different beast now, and also like even when you talk about having all those session guys, that the budgets back then to be able to do that doesn't do that now.
Yeah, well, I heard it was like a record label would throw 10 albums out and expect one of them to be a success. So that's the kind of return on investment you were looking at from record sales, was that you could literally throw that much money at the wall and you'd get that back from one major success.
Yeah.
You just can't afford to do that now. And it's a shame, because if you look at this year, look how many amazing records came out in the same year. And it's a real shame that we don't have that.
Well, also people bought records back then. That's
this is what I'm saying, is that the return on investment from putting that album out is purely due to the sales. So they would make enough sales from one major success to pay for those 10 other records.
But it must be incredibly interesting being one of those session guys in the 70s, for example, who nowadays, I mean, when we're talking about the absolute greatest.
Sorry guys, can we just hold that thought? I've got to get rid of this fucking fly. Excuse me.
We should keep this bit, I think. Let's see this kung fu really works.
I kind of want the fly to like reappear again in a little while, just for a laugh.
No, he's gone. He's well and truly out the window. Yeah, I opened the window. He's gone straight away. God, he was persistent, man.
Freedom. So I think it must have been really interesting being a session guy in the 70s. And I've spoken to guys who probably more who are UK based in the 90s, and they talk about the difference. But especially the 70s, you think how big that session scene was to now, and I wonder if those guys have to go and tour more, and just things are different. And that must be a really interesting thing to have gone through and seen that gradual change.
Yeah, well, I think obviously live music sales have definitely overtaken in terms of like revenue stream for musicians, especially for us. I was reading into Chuck Rainey actually for this record, just because like I love him as a bass player. He's worked with so many artists and done so much studio stuff that I know that it was very rare that Steely Dan took those musicians on tour with them. And that was due to the fact that the quote here was that financially secure musicians are probably harder to work with on tour, or harder to accommodate, I guess, because they're not going to take as much crap when on tour. So there was a lot of these financially secure musicians that wouldn't tour as much. They would just stick to the studio.
Steve Gadd wouldn't share a room. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. What you're saying, that these guys could probably charge a lot of money.
Well, think about it, if album sales were making this much money and you're on those albums, you're doing well enough, to not need to tour, I guess, as much.
And they're doing it daily, these big records.
Oh yeah, I mean that was the days of going in, getting a chart, smashing it out, and then moving on to the next one.
That was something I wanted to touch upon, and it touches upon it a little bit in the classic album documentary. They're talking about they'd had it all written out, and I forget the guitarist's name, but he used to a lot of
Larry Carton.
Was it Larry?
Larry Carton's the main. the main one on this album. There's a few.
Right, and I think he charted a lot of the stuff out, and they were saying how these guys had to be phenomenal readers, and I definitely think that's not such a thing as much now in the studios. It depends on the studio sessions, but in the artist world, it's rare you see charts. You more see that in like your maybe orchestra stuff or TV film thing. But it was interesting. You know, I would love to know what did Steve Gadd see on Asia written down, because obviously that he's so creative in those sections where, if we want to call it a drum solo, a drum break, or whatever, that he's got the hits in there. Everything else is so Gadd, and you can tell it's him. But I love that you've got someone. It seemed like back then that was a much more of a tool that you had to have as a big session guy.
I've actually got a really good story about this. It's not to do with this album, but it is to do with Lee Ritenour, who played on this album. So he's obviously like complete session legend. But it's actually Steve Lukather who told this story. It was something like when he was 19, I think he was new to the session game. So that would have been the mid 70s, surely, because Lukather's like early 60s, isn't he? He's like 62. So this would have probably been like mid to late 70s. So the era that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And he said he had this session. I can't remember what he said it was. I think it might have been a film soundtrack or something like that. And he got a puncture on the way there. So he was like really late, you know, really flustered, 19 years old, whatever. And he turned up and he was, it was like a whole, you know, room full of people, still flustered, sat down, and it was Lee Ritenour on the other guitar. So it was guitar one and guitar two. And I think they knew each other. I think they were friends prior to this. Obviously, Lee Ritenour's a bit older. Anyway, so they sat down, got his sheet put in front of him, and he said it was just it was like a modified piano chart or something. And he said he could read, obviously, but this was like, he was like, what is this? What's going on here? What the hell's happening? Guy starts counting it off to record. Lee Ritenour sees the panic in Lukather's face, switches their charts, right? And Lee Ritenour's chart was like a bunch of tacit, much easier kind of stuff. And then he just played the part flawlessly, Ritenour.
Wow.
And they just did it. And he says, Lukather says, well, that moment saved his session, you know, livelihood for years to come. And he said to Lee Ritenour afterwards, he was like, why did you do that? And he was like, because I like you. But that's what he said. He was just like so chill about it.
That's like, really cool.
He saw the panic, and as it was being counted off, just switched the charts and just did it.
Does he delve into any more of that story afterwards about what did he work on his reading with that? Like, was it a case of he was just so flustered, it was so quick he didn't know, or did he struggle with that ability to read those modified piano scores?
I think it was a bit of both, because he said Ritenour was obviously the more accomplished. He said Lee Ritenour could read anything, like just so he, maybe it was a case of he wasn't quite as good at reading, but also a bit flustered.
A lot of it as well. I could imagine that chart probably looking absolutely horrific.
Probably.
You have to think everywhere. About the quality of some of the charts you would probably get then.
Some of the printing,
yeah. Not only that, but a lot of the times, like if it was a modified piano part, was that written by a guitarist? Did it have voicings in mind? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, sometimes I get given charts. Well, rarely now get given any charts, but you know, that I've written by usually a keys player, or you know, who at the MD plays keys or whatever, and has written a bass part that you immediately have to just adapt on the fly to actually play like a bass, because some of the things going on are not right. And there's a lot of that going on, especially in these studio sessions. I know Chuck Rainey definitely talks about that, where he would say he'd always prefer to have a chord chart and just do the bassist's job. But sometimes you would be given notes and dots, and then that's up to you to take that and actually make it sound good.
Well, that kind of comes back to a bit of what we were talking about last time, where I find really helpful on a chart if it says something like play a la Nile Rodgers style or something like that. That immediately is way more helpful than having like a semi-quaver you know, strumming pattern notated exactly, being like, blah, 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 you know, it's a bit, or like, you know, in the style of The Edge, and then you're like, okay, cool, get my delay up.
Yeah.
But that's those sorts of descriptions.
We mentioned him a couple of times now as well, haven't we?
Yeah.
No, you're right, and I always
delay.
find that it's interesting hearing of a musician's perspective on that, because a drummer's thing is different again, because I would say obviously rhythmic values could be challenging, but drum charts are, I would say, easier to read than a guitar chart, because you could just see all these notes, and like you said, it's how it's explained. But it's interesting how one interprets it and creates that sound. And you have to. That's one of the things I love about reading, actually, is when you were given something, they've actually hired you to do you on it. So here's the chart, but I want you to do you on it and make. Especially these guys, we're talking about Luke Byrne, Lee Ritton.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not a thing as much now, and I do quite enjoy it when it comes up in the studio, but not like back then where it seems like it was more of a norm and an absolute must.
Yeah, it was their bread and butter, wasn't it, really? They'd turn up, and like you said, because there was so much less room for error than there is nowadays, you know, they'd be like, just, you need solid time from the off, solid tone. You'd probably have to get your tone pretty damn quickly as well. But I guess they were just so used to it.
These guys would do it. These guys would be doing these jobs because they were the absolute best at doing that job.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's, you know, to be able to not only have this impeccable time, feel, and reading ability, but also to inject, as we've always said on this podcast, your own individuality into the part as well. To have that all, you've got to be one of the best around, for sure. And that's why these guys were doing all these jobs, and they were flying around doing all this serious work. Whereas, you know, that's definitely shifted these days, you know.
Yeah. Should we dive in a bit then on some of the players on this album?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the bass we've kind of delved into a little bit, haven't we?
We have. I mean, just honourable mentions for Chuck Rainey, because this guy's done everything. I mean, he's played with Aretha Franklin, Joe Cocker, George Benson, Louis Armstrong, Etta James, Quincy Jones, James Brown, Roberta Flack, Marvin Gaye, Donny Hathaway, Diana Ross, Ry Cooder. Like, the list goes on and on. Those are just the big ones for me. But, you know, the guy's done it all, you know. And for most of it, he did it all with the same bass, the Fender P-Bass 57 model.
Nice. Very nice.
Straight into the desk as well on this record, I know. Yeah. He just recorded that. It was that P-Bass straight into the desk and laid it down. There's like, obviously some of the amazing bass work on this record where he works with, like, the drummers to just lock in and create almost the perfect part, and this is what he was so good at doing. You know, he likens bass, I know I don't have the exact quote, but he likens the bass to being like a supporting role in a movie. You know, it's to make the lead role shine. That's your job. And that he's up there for me with Lee Sklar as well, as one of those bass players that aren't known for being much of a virtuoso and having that sort of crazy flair and soloing ability. Not to say that they don't have that ability, but it's just not what they're known for. What they're known for is just creating these impeccable bass lines that always are just perfect for the song.
It's always right. Yeah, that's the thing.
Absolutely. Even when there's a story on that, you probably watched you watched the classic albums as well, didn't you, Johnny? But there's that section where I think it's Peg, where the chorus comes around, and they didn't want slap bass on the record. And they did it a few takes and a few times, and there was one time he sort of turned around in the studio and did a take on slap, and that was what made the record, because he just knew that was what needed to go down, you know. And you know, so he went against the judgment of the people whose record it was. But he just knows what's right for a record.
Yeah, it was really cool when he said he turned around and put a partition up so they couldn't see what he's doing. And then they're like, yeah, that's great. And he did what they asked him not to do. I also love that confidence musically to be, and also obviously having a good relationship with the band to be able to do that. because there's also something to be said about just getting on and doing the job. But I love the fact that he went, no, I really think this works. And you know what? It stands out for me. And actually, Peg is my favourite song on the album. But yeah, that does stand out for me.
I'd probably go with Peg or Deacon Blues.
Yeah, love Deacon Blues as well.
Because I mean that I think that is probably my favourite, but Peg as well. They're two kind of. They're probably my two. You know, I'd have to choose two for this one. But
yeah, I found it really difficult to pick a favourite.
Deacon Blues, funnily enough, is the one track that Chuck Rainey does not play.
Yeah, it's Becker, isn't it, on bass?
Yeah. I don't know why I don't know why that was. Maybe Becker put it down originally, and they just went with that. But,
that's the one and only track that Lee Ritenour plays on as well, Deacon Blues. I mean, it's Lee Ritenour, Larry Carlton, and Dean Parks all on one track. That's like...
And Bernard Purdie.
And Bernard Purdie, yeah, exactly. That's like session A-list stuff like
it's
that.
It's an absolutely lovely pocket, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's Purdie's the man.
Yeah.
Purdie's the man. And the combination of the two, Chuck Rainey and Purdie together, is just... You don't get better than that. You really don't get much better than that.
Yeah.
And that's. I wanted to point out as well. That's a 7-minute song, and that's not the only song at that sort of length. But that's amazing to have those length songs. Like, and we talked about Hotel California, I guess last week, and you have obviously the opening track, which is about that long, whatever it is. But that's also rare now to kind of have those songs that are that long and that creative and that great. It's because I imagine a lot of their songs, they would have been full takes. I know they would have been adding stuff. I imagine a lot of the takes on each instrument are probably all one thing.
Yeah.
But they got the best of the best. But yeah, that was a standout song for me as well.
Yeah. I tell you what though, the real hero of the album is Victor Feldman, doing basically almost everything keys based, like piano, Rhodes, playing the vibes, percussion as well, which I guess comes under vibes too. But he really makes it for me. I mean, it's just everything. What's the one? I think actually my favourite might be I Got the News, because of that like that kind of syncopated piano part. It's just the pocket. It feels so good, so good. Yeah. I love that. And also he's from Edgware. I actually looked into him. He was born in Edgware, which is right near me. So.
Wow. I actually found I Got the News almost like a theatrical kind of sound. I can imagine that in a theatre show.
Yeah, I can hear that. Now you've mentioned it, I can definitely hear that.
For sure. It's got a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek feel to it, hasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, there definitely feels like that story thing. And that was... I just found it really interesting everything going on with it. At one point you've got like guitar picking, you've got drums that are funky, but you've got the jazz chords on the piano.
Yeah.
Again, with that fusion that we talked about, but it was just really worked, and it was, and that was Ed Green on drums, and I actually don't know a lot about Ed Green. It's funny because you've got these big session guys. I know Ed Green played. I researched a bit. He did Barry White, Carpenters, Osmonds, Jack Beck, Hall and Oates. Again, a huge list, but it's not that brand name of your Gadd and your Purdies. But when you look at the things they've done, they were still top of their game as well. But that again, really like that funkiness in the drums in this.
For sure, yeah.
There's one thing going back to what Dion was saying. One thing to notice and almost give credit for is Fagan and Becker's ability to notice or understand their limitations on their instruments. Like we were saying about Becker when he said, I met Chuck Rainey and then didn't need to bring my bass to the studio no more. Like it's that kind of. So Donald Fagan obviously. Knowing that his keys ability, as songwriters, obviously, they know that they're maybe not the player that they need to pull off what they want, and that takes a certain. Imagine being a guitarist and going, "Do you know what? I'm not going to nail this.
I'm not going to go."
But I also like sometimes they kind of put pace to that a little bit. Like for instance, on I Got the News, I think Larry Carlton does the first guitar solo. And then Walter Becker plays the second one. And it's just kind of cool that he was like, he could have just been like, no, Larry, you just take it all. But he was maybe on that tune. It might have been an in the moment thing. You never know.
Well, I could imagine there's probably a million.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But they chose one of. You know, that's the thing with this record is I'd love to have a collection of all the takes from all the different session bands and to hear what other people brought to it.
Just hearing that album with the different lineups. Be interesting how different if it sound, how different it would sound.
Yeah. What about Gad on the title track though, eh? Beast.
Well, again, that was the reason I got the album from my mum, I think when I was 15 or 16, was because in a drum magazine they're like, you have to check this album out, and it's Gad. And at the time when I got it, I didn't realise Gad had only done one track until I got the CD and saw the album sleeve. But it's just, I mean, firstly, you know it's Gad. It sounds like him. It's got his creativity and what he often brings. I don't love the song, but I love the performance from Gad, and it is an absolute masterclass. Like it's incredible. But yeah, I'm not mad about the song, but it's impeccable, and another 8-minute song,
So
that you could go on about, you could do a podcast about Gad, like
for sure,
all the stuff he's done, but he's up there as one of the absolute best. And just again, like you're talking about the bass players you've mentioned today, Mike, is they just know, Gad just knows what to play. And that's the sign of those great session players back then. All these styles could read, like someone's got an ink pen and just flicked it at a page. They can just read it and they can play it, and they can also be creative. Because one thing I wanted to point out is, I think as musicians, we often go into albums and go, "Oh, I really love what it's doing there. I want to learn that." Now, there's one thing learning it. There's another thing being the person that came up with it. And I really love. I love Gad, but the fact of his creativity, while being that sound of the individual that he is, and delivering what they wanted for the song. It's really, for me, it's the drum performance of the album. That being said, all the drumming on the album is incredible, but this one was definitely a standout one for me.
Yeah, it's important to note as well that we're talking about this reading ability and this session ability to just turn up and nail things. Well, these weren't songs that were just turned up and nailed in one take either. Like, as we were saying, the band that they decided on would actually rehearse this to the point, I think it's mentioned in that documentary again, it's rehearsed to the point of perfection and then beyond that as well, so that then you relax into it. So it's almost like a 2-stage. You get it till it's perfect, and then you get it to beyond that where it's so perfect that it begins to loosen up again. And you can definitely hear that in a lot of the parts where they are just so creative. And I think you've got past that point of you're nailing the track to the point where you're now starting to try things on the track.
That sense of security and comfort that comes from knowing it inside out, like the back of your hand.
It allows you, when you're in that stage, it allows you to be more creative, doesn't it?
For sure.
But like Mike said on the documentary, they said they'd go and do a 2-3 hour session in the morning, and then they go for lunch, and then they come back and they try some takes, and like the engineer, producer, some of the musicians were like, wow, like this, we're just literally drilling this stuff over and over again. And that is mentally draining. That, not only that, but it's not the most, it's not the most simple stuff, is it? So you also got this complicated stuff, you're drilling it, and you're being creative, and that's really hard work. I reckon they would have worked their musicians really hard.
Yeah, definitely. I would say so.
And I think I think all the elements came together in that as well. I think obviously it's taken a lot of time, but you can imagine how many records where this was probably attempted and was nowhere near the success that this record was. In terms of musicality, musicianship. I'm sure this isn't the first, and not the last of where they've tried to do such a creative venture. And this one was just such a success that it all came together. As we all said, it sounds like a complete album. It sounds like one strong narrative throughout, sonically.
100%.
And that's that's rare. So when you're talking about that's what, over 40 musicians credited on this album. but it sounds like the same band almost, by the end of it, you know.
Yeah, I love that. What was that story you said about Bernard Purdie, Mike, that I love? That one you said when they...
yeah, where they say there was like 2 banners that he has at this kit, and on one side it says, "You done it." I think it was, "You done it." Yeah. You done hired the hitmaker. That
I was going to ask you about
to turn up to the studio sessions with that banner.
Fantastic.
I was going to ask you about that, Mike, actually, because I was going to ask you, is it on this album? Because I couldn't work out in the documentary if they were suggesting he was known for doing that, or if they're not on that album. It wasn't that clear. I didn't know.
I don't know. I think it might be something that he'd just do when he was hired. But it's funny, actually. They mention in the documentary about the different types of player that you'd get, and almost them being like the different coasts and what the approach was. So in New York, you'd have a guy turn up, the drummer would turn up with his snare and his sticks,
and
ready for the session.
Cymbals,
and that's it. And then on the other side in LA, obviously, where most records were getting churned out, you'd have these players that would just, they'd have a team would turn up, set their kit up, and they'd have another lot going to the next studio, setting up for the next session. And it was all, the dude would turn up with like ultimate professionalism. Do you know what I mean? But they would sometimes lack the necessary kind of creativity that the New York players had. So there was this kind of, what I got from it anyway was that the New York side of playing was much more sort of creative and jazzy, almost, in the sense of they're willing to try things and take risks on records and play. There were more players. But then on the other side, you've got these sort of consummate professionals that their job would be to turn up, nail it every time, and on to the next one. And there's the 2 different kinds of musician, and I still see that today. There are definitely musicians that I know that are definitely on that kind of New York side of playing, which I would go to them because they're just amazingly great at the instrument and creative with it. But then you've also got these other guys that they're going to turn up on time and nail it and be really good, but they don't necessarily have that spark. Yeah. It's funny that's a thing, and that it's mentioned in this documentary.
For me, big fan of the Halftime Shuffle, and I think any drummer, especially, but anyone into the Halftime Shuffle, you really listen to. I really love how he stepped his hi-hat whilst he's doing this groove, and on the documentary he talks a little bit about what they wanted, and he was like, I know exactly what they want. They want the Purdie Shuffle, and they're like, what's that? And he starts playing this. But it's good to know that. So this on this album, and then in '79, Fall in the Rain, Led Zeppelin was released, which was a Halftime Shuffle. I can't say exactly. I haven't read somewhere that Bonham went, I took influence, but I have no doubt it's going to have some relationship there. And then in '82, Rosanna. So, in my opinion, if a drummer wants to get into the Halftime Shuffle, and if you listen to Home at Last, Fall in the Rain, and Rosanna, those 3 are the ultimate Halftime Shuffles. And it's interesting this one came first. So I know that Piccaro on Rosanna does say he took the idea from the Purdie Shuffle, and I think he said he took it from Fall in the Rain as well. And then he adds the Bo Diddley. So he definitely has been quoted saying that. But I don't know about Bonham, if there's an actual link there. But those are the 3 Halftime Shuffles. And it's, on Home at Last, it's impeccable. And like I said, I really like the fact he steps his hi-hat as well. So it kind of gives that slight low in the hi-hat opening, but it's not like a big opening like Fall in the Rain. It's a big shh. This is just kind of within the whole groove. And I mean, the Purdie Shuffle.
I like the use of dead notes in it, in the sense that it starts. The dead notes kind of grow as the song grows in Home at Last. The dead notes get more and more as the song kind of goes on.
Yeah. I love that old video.
Like
it's Bernard Purdie, that old video when he's playing it, isn't he? He's like, "That's it," or something. Is that the one? It is, wasn't it? It's when he's like teaching it. Yeah.
Such a character, isn't he?
Yeah, he's great. I mean, you can tell that from that Hitmaker story.
Yeah. Just imagine that. Because you're all in like close quarters in the studio, and it's it'd be amazing working with a character like that, you know, because he's so confident on the edge of arrogance, I would say. I mean, he rightly deserved. He's incredible, but that's what a character. You know?
Yeah, and what I got to mention as well, Chuck Rainey's bass on Home at Last as well. Just locks in and links up. Like, it's so many different approaches a bass player can take to certain songs. Like, we were talking about Hotel California last week, and that bass line that Randy Meisner plays on Hotel California, the track itself, there's so many different. I was just thinking about this recently this week, and the different approaches you could take to that song as a bass player, and having that kind of root 5 root, that boom 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 going over the top of it, kind of makes that tune. Whereas it could have easily been just a goom, boom goom to get. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's about just fitting in, and it's the same with this one as well, hitting that snare as well. A lot of the time, as a bass player, you're kind of staying out the way of the snare and letting it breathe. But in this one, because of the nature of the groove, it's that boom, boom, boom. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of just locking right in and sitting on top of the snare and almost impacting with it. And it's just a really good thing to note. Yeah. That and then, you know, his approach to other songs on this, obviously he's staying away from even the bass drum as well in other songs, and that P bass that he uses, and just how it just sits in the mix, how a P bass is just beautiful. You know, well, I think every working bass player has to have a P bass. There's just something about that design and that sound. It sits in mixes so well when recording. Yeah, you know,
I've been in sessions where bass players turned up, and this one particular producer, he was like, "Nah, you're playing my P bass on them," and he grabbed it off the wall and they play that P bass.
Oh man, every studio you go into's got a P bass there.
Yeah,
because it's just one of those things. There's something about that P bass tone that sits perfectly in a mix. Not all the time, but it tends to be whenever I go to lay something down, most of the time it'll be a P bass that I'll go to first.
Also, it's interesting. We had a conversation, Mike, a long time ago, where we talk about how Pino's approach to One and Only that have to add. There's another great halftime shot on the drums, but the Pino lets the snare breathe on that, right? Am I right in saying that? Was that your approach?
This is a different thing. It's a note length thing. What I really like, and I hope it's Pino on this record, but what I love about about that particular bass line is that the note lengths are so important. Now, there's a lot when you're playing, like I was saying, letting the snare breathe is quite a common thing to do. And when you get a slow groove going on like that, a lot of the time as a bass player, you'll stop when the snare drum hit. Stop at the snare drum hit, you know. So it almost creates that kind of on that track. It's like dum dum bum. But with the note length choice on that One and Only track, the Adele song, it goes over an extra half beat. So you're letting it ring. So it's bum bum bum, and coming off half beat later, totally different feel. And it's more of a retro feel. It's more of an older sort of sound. But it allows the music to not be so jumpy. Sometimes you want that impact where it stops at the snare and goes silent. But the note length choice is, and it says that's a song actually doing it on that show, Johnny. It really made me look at stuff like that and the note length.
I actually want to mention on the album, I'm sure you'll agree, one of my favourite bass parts is on Josie. You know, on that main riff when he's going, good. It's so the bass is playing such a key role. You've got the guitar doing the funky thing, and it's just so cool, man. Sounds great.
Those double stops are great.
Yeah,
I was checking out this One and Only, and it's Pino and Steely Dave actually.
Yeah.
And that I was just looking at that.
I thought it was Pino. I think a lot of that record, that 21, was Pino.
He's done. Yeah, he's done 4 tracks on it. I mean, I'm going off topic here, but yeah, it's interesting. Like we had spoken about or something similar. About that, and it's interesting how a bass groove next to a drum groove can change everything. And what space it allows can allow someone else to step in that space, or what kind of it creates with the groove. So it's always really interesting from any musician to not only look at your own instrument, but look what's going on around you and why, kind of thing.
100%.
Yeah.
It sort of separates the wheat from the chaff in a lot of scenarios.
For sure.
I think for sure.
Let's talk about another couple of key musical contributions on the album. So obviously, you mentioned earlier Wayne Shorter stepping in, ripping that solo on what was it again? It was
Asia.
Yeah, of course, on the title track. Yeah,
on the title track. Yeah.
And Michael McDonald. Forget Michael McDonald's. What is it about him? He's so back there in the mix, right? But he's so recognizable. He's the first half a second of the first note that he sings, you're like, yeah, that's Michael McDonald. Well,
you should definitely check out the documentary, Dion, because they solo it and they do a little clip on about him doing his BVs and how he creates those chords, and he talks about how hard it was because the notes are so close to each other. But you're right, he's so recognisable. I mean, you always know when it's Michael McDonald, even on BVs. But that was interesting. So yeah, definitely check out the documentary. There's a little bit on there, and you hear it, and it's like, wow.
Yeah. I mean, Michael McDonald might be one of those singers that has the most impressions done of him. He has a voice. He has
distinguishable,
an instantly recognisable voice, Michael McDonald.
The only one I wanted to add actually was who was a phenomenal drummer, Jim Keltner. He was a fantastic drummer, and not only his pocket, but I wanted to point out that he played dustbin lids on Josie. It's the only track he plays on. He plays dustbin lids, and they soloed out on the documentary as well, and it's really interesting.
Wow.
But not much needs to be said about Jim Keltner. I'm sure most musicians are aware of him and how many tracks he's played on. I haven't written a list down, but and also on that song, like the pocket on Josie, it's Keltner. It's again, and it goes throughout this whole record. It's a real masterclass in musicianship. It's really, really phenomenal. So, but that's the only thing I wanted to add there with Keltner. That definitely needs a mention for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy having him, Bernard Purdie, and Steve Gadd all on one album. That, considering their, session CVs, that's just is quite mind blowing actually to have 3 such heavy hitters in 40 minutes of music.
Also, how individual they are. And another one, I think it's happened a lot though. Like I forget the Michael McDonald album, but it's one of my favourite records, and it's my favourite Michael McDonald one, and it's just Gadd and Vaccaro, and 2 absolute giants, and who have their own sound, but again, and you can tell, especially as a drummer, you can tell who's playing what. But I think back then, these guys, that was the thing, you pulled in the best players, and you made your record the best it possibly could be. It was definitely a done thing. And of course, you get your huge session guys now who get the call on a lot of the big records, and there's it's no coincidence why, like they're great with what they do, but definitely back then there was more of those guys, especially in does anyone know, did they record most of this album in LA? Was it New York and LA? It was a bit both,
I think it was Village Recorder in West Los Angeles, and also the Warner Brothers studio. Oh, and it says ABC and A&R in New York City as well. So
so I think it was divided, but it's amazing that you've got those Hubbard guys, LA, Hubbard guys in New York, and the best of the best. I think it was more common back then.
I'll tell you one thing we forgot to mention as well is the fact the album name title came from I think it was Fagan's.
It was their high school mates, their high school friends' older brother.
Yeah, and she was Korean, and they used to call her Asia, I think, but they didn't know how to spell it, so they just spelled it AJA, something like that. It's just, it's wild. It's almost as wild as they're getting their band name from a dildo. I mean, it's just pretty quirky stuff, isn't it? Yeah.
Isn't it amazing when you think about these sort of names or song titles? You know, actually, I wanted to add to that, actually, because Black Cow was apparently an ice cream soda.
That's right, yeah.
Really?
But apparently, I think across the States, I think it's referred to differently, but he was saying it's a root beer and vanilla ice cream. And that's a Black Cow, and that's the opening track.
I see.
So that was, and then that song was actually sampled by a hip-hop band. I don't know what the hip-hop band were called, but that was sampled, you know, like a lot of those great songs back then. You know, we mentioned Michael McDonald. Keep forgetting that was a big hip hop song as well.
That's right. Yeah.
It was an ice cream soda, which was so it's interesting where they're getting their names from.
It's very hip, isn't it? They're very hipsters. They're very hipster-like, aren't they?
Yeah.
Two of them. And their lyrical approach is also quite hipster in that sense.
They talk about Deacon Blues being like an autobiographical song lyrically, but they both grew up in the same area in New York, didn't they?
That's right.
Yeah. I forget what area. I don't know if it was Queens or something, but they're New Yorkers themselves.
Interesting. Shall we do some ratings then?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, man. Who wants to go first? Johnny?
Oh, yeah, I'll go first. Okay, for me, I think it's not an album I actively go out my way to listen to. It's probably not exactly where my taste lies. Like I mentioned earlier, I really like earlier dance stuff. But because of the musicianship and what it offers me as a listener, I probably mark it slightly higher than I would if I was just I'm just listening to an album. So I'm going to give it an 8, just because I think if you're a musician, it's a real masterclass and it's a must listen. But it's not one I'm just going to stick on randomly, personally.
Great, Mike.
Yeah, I really like this record. I've liked it since uni. I just think it's such an achievement, like we were discussing, how you get so many musicians and, you know, the musical complexity as well. And to make this a successful record, you know, is an immense achievement. I agree with Johnny, like my musical taste isn't right down this avenue. It's not something I would listen to a lot. It's something I do go back to and enjoy. But it's not one of those. It's not a Hotel California, you know. For that reason, I'd probably give it about an 8 out of 10. Strong, but not my favourite.
Excellent. Do you know what's really funny? You guys have basically said pretty much exactly what I wanted to say. So I've always really appreciated Steely Dan. I thought really great band, but I never got super heavily into them because I always just didn't find them that accessible. Maybe when I was a bit younger, found them maybe a bit too quirky for my ear. Having said that, I've really enjoyed listening to this album. Like I've listened to it a hell of a lot this week, as we always do, and I think I really like it's quite slick production. Given what you said, Mike, to think of how chaotic it may have been in the studio and to come out with something that's so slickly produced, you know, swapping all these musicians out, is a massive achievement. The songs, if I'm speaking completely honestly about the songs, they don't hit me and get inside me quite as much as something like Hotel California. You know, there's something about that is just gets you more, you know, you feel it more. But similarly, because of the musicians and the musicianship and the parts and all that, I'm definitely going to give it an 8 as well. I think that's a fair assessment.
Great. It's
8 all round.
Yeah. As always, thanks for tuning in, and please don't forget to send us an email if you've got any additional facts that you'd like to tag on to anything that we've spoken about. or if you've got anything else that you want to discuss. And of course, if there's any albums that you'd like us to talk about. Otherwise, see you next time. Catch you later, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.